the study of all that and the properties of mushrooms and what they can do and how like they seem like kind of magical things that don't fit a lot of the laws of other kinds of life. So it's super cool to like add that into a story.
They're definitely weird. They remind me a little bit of they're like the jellyfish of the plant world.
Totally, yeah.
If you know what I mean with that.
Yeah.
Welcome, friends, to episode 378 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss T. Kingfisher's 2022 novel, What Moves the Dead. So, James, this is kind of a strange one for us. This is the first time we've ever done an adaptation, I think, that doesn't have some sort of film version of it. We're going to take on this book that is a retelling. So we're kind of using the term adaptation loose here. But I think it kind of falls under the larger umbrella of adaptation because you are starting with an original story, and this one happens to be The Fall of the House of Usher, which we have previously covered, and you are turning it into something new, which I think, that's in the spirit of adaptation. I think this kind of qualifies.
Yeah, and I think the source material also kind of qualifies, the idea of adaptation and change maybe fits in there.
Yeah, thematically lines up with that for sure.
But just in general, it's a fun challenge because it is, like you said, the same kind of process for an artist looking at an original material and deciding what to keep, what to change, finding their own voice through that story. So it's definitely sort of simpatico with what we tend to do around here. So it feels fitting. And the idea that T. Kingfisher will be joining us for a live show at Norwescon is such a great reason to cover the material and then get to talk to her all about it.
Yes. So Ursula Vernon is the author. She writes under the name T. Kingfisher whenever she writes her adult work. If you are listening to this, unfortunately, it is too late for you to join us. We will have already recorded it, but stay tuned because that episode will be coming out in the main feed, and we're intending them to kind of be a pair, this episode and that one. Here, we're going to do our normal thing. We're going to analyze the story. We're going to talk about it from a craft perspective, dive into our maybe guesses for what might have been going on, why you choose this story, what themes are being played with, that kind of stuff. And then we'll be able to follow it up next week and actually talk to her in front of the audience at Norwescon, ask her questions, and get some of the details about writing this book, which is one of her most popular novels from what I was seeing. So it's an exciting one to do. She's a guest of honor at Norwescon, so it should be, I would imagine, a well-attended event, and I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Absolutely. We're going to get that Ursula Vernon, T. Kingfisher bump, I'm sure, in the audience there.
I hope so. Fingers crossed. If you saw us at Norwescon, by the way, welcome. Thank you for checking out this other episode. We have lots of other stuff for you. If you are curious about horror in particular, or even just fantasy, we have lots of other projects we've covered.
Yes, and if you're a listener and you didn't know that we were going to be at Norwescon, we have been sharing that around on social media, so hopefully you saw it leading up to it. If not, be sure to connect with us on all of those social media platforms to be informed on all of our live shows that may or may not be coming up.
All right, so we got to do our thing, though. So let's talk a little bit about this book. What we normally do is we talk about stuff in sort of a spoiler-free way, and we're going to do that here, assuming that people who may not have read the book are curious about it. So that's how we're going to keep this conversation early. Then we'll talk about Ursula Vernon, the person. Then we'll move into our spoiler section where we'll summarize the novel and talk about it as we go. So that's what you can expect from this episode. James, how did you feel about this novel in general?
Well, I really liked it. I found it to be really towards my sensibilities. I think in taking obviously something that we're familiar with, something that we like, and we've seen a couple of versions of, a couple of films, we've read the source material, there's a TV show.
That's right, because we covered, there's a 60s adaptation we covered with Vincent Price, and then those were the Hammer films. Am I right about that?
House of Usher, 1960s film, directed by Roger Corman, written by Richard Matheson.
Corman.
Yes.
Corman films. I think that was what I was looking for. I think he did a series of adaptations. So we've done that version, and then of course we did the more modern, The Fall of the House of Usher, Flanagan TV adaptation, and that was our main subject last time we touched on this. But it gave us an excuse to explore Poe. We read a bunch of different stories by Poe and kind of talked about one of the things that he is known for and does well in regards to The Fall of the House of Usher, which is one of his most famous stories. I think it's probably arguable which one is his most famous, but it's definitely up there.
Maybe The Raven.
Yeah,
You
The
know, I think
Raven, if you want to call it a story, it's definitely his
kind
most
of
famous work.
it's
That
iconic to him too. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of synonymous with Poe.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of big shoes to come in and try and tackle. This is an old enough story that it's kind of in that space of public domain. Yeah, it's like probably 200 years old, I guess. So it feels almost like myth at a certain point. And so to me, it feels like fair game for this kind of retelling. And yeah, I think where that line is maybe an interesting debate. You know, just because something's like public domain, does that mean that you can take it and do a retelling and people will be open to it? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for personal taste, I like the idea of taking a work like this because it does feel so ubiquitous, kind of. It feels so like mythic and something that's like people have attached to. You know, Poe as a writer, the influence that's gone on from that. I like the idea of approaching these stories because, of course, like, you know, Ursula Vernon has to be a massive fan of Poe to
I don't
want
know.
want to try to tell this kind of a story.
I mean,
I would
think
assume
the story feels like it is engaging with the same sort of gothic storytelling mode of the original, and I have to imagine you're a fan of it if you're doing that. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. We'll have to ask her that. It's a good question for her.
I like the idea of doing it from like a loving perspective and adding in sort of some more modern horrific elements, things that are like a little more like skin prickling these days, like things that are freak people out a little more than maybe Poe's story being so like atmospheric and being so much about like the turmoil and like the way that this house is representative of the family and everything like that.
Yeah.
Finding a way to change that in a way that feels fundamentally different, but yet at the same time is in keeping with that still kind of like spread and the dread that's involved in all of it. I don't know. I found it to be really exciting just because like it's a story that you know, but as it's playing out, it keeps you guessing. At least it did for me. Oftentimes I was like, you know, I think I knew where we were going to end up, but all the steps along the way were pretty interesting and fun to see sort of reimagined.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about the reasons for reimaginings, I do absolutely think that could be that. But sometimes people do retellings because of almost like spite or anger about something.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Yeah.
like people might see something and be angry about its legacy in some way or angry about the author in some way. Victor LaValle is an author we haven't touched on yet, but is sort of famous for doing these Lovecraft retellings.
Yeah.
But he takes them and makes them stories about race fundamentally from the Black perspective. And, you know, I'm not super familiar with the work, so I don't want to comment on it too much, but that's my understanding of it. And we talked about that with Lovecraft Country a little bit. But those are more like retellings. And so here we are doing a bit of that too, where we're like changing some of the things around gender. And I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll just say that like, we're exploring gender identity in a like that is definitely not present in the original.
Yeah.
And
especially considering the era, right? And
considering
again,
the era and what is the purpose as far, or I guess not the purpose, but the purpose of it I think is pretty self-evident, but what is the impetus behind that and why? Yeah. So, but just in general, as it read, I thought this book was very fun to read. I'm currently writing a novel that is set in a similar time period. So it's already sort of the Gothic language and mode that I'm kind of operating in all the time as I'm writing.
Yeah.
So
nice.
it fit right in well. Yeah, I found that I really appreciated the flourishes of the more, gilded or overwrought sort of prose of the time period that was so common. But I feel like she does it with a fairly light touch too. And it actually reads in a really compelling modern way as well. It feels accessible. Yeah. So it's like it's a nice mix I think she was able to find. And she also has this dry humor that is really present throughout that I think is a hallmark of at least her adult fiction. I don't know. I don't know enough about her young adult stuff. I had always heard this about T. Kingfisher, but this is my first ever T. Kingfisher novel. I should say that as well. I'm not super versed in her other work. It's a name I've known about for a long time, but yeah, I've never actually read any of other stuff.
Yeah, I'm really excited that we get a chance to read it for this reason.
Yeah.
Because I had heard about T. Kingfisher as well, and like another thing that I love about this version of the story is like the focus on, I mean, you mentioned gender already, but also like the focus on character, like the way that like so many of the characters that I would not think twice really in Poe's story, like they're there to maybe be like creepy background characters, have been like fleshed out in ways that I think lead to like more compelling sort of interactions between some of the characters. And in that way, I didn't know what to expect. Like you can see kind of the inserts for who these characters are meant to be, and the way that the world is built out as well. Like I'm just surprised at like the scope of it, and it doesn't surprise me to hear that there's a sequel novel, because I was like, wow, there's like really interesting like peripheral stuff going on in this story that I want to learn more about.
We'll get into that. But I was going to say Poe's story is definitely shorter than this. It's like a long short story. This is a short novel. In that amount of time, I think Ursula is able to really explore those side characters like you talked about that maybe just had a role to play in the original short story or weren't present at all, and really develop them. Because really it was like Roderick, Usher, and Easton are really the only two characters that matter. Madeline to an extent, but she's more of just like a figure that's being discussed. It's not like she's like super present throughout. Yeah, I think this takes the opportunity to explore those side characters, as you said, and I think that is a cool part of it for sure. So I guess my question is, as a piece of horror, was it effective for you? Was it scary? Did you find it unsettling? And then beyond that, would you recommend it to fans of horror, and maybe like who would you recommend it to?
Yeah, I was mentioning at the beginning that it's a cool way to experience the story through my sensibilities a little more. I really like sort of fungal fiction. I've always been drawn to that. I'd like to read more of it, honestly. And I love the way that it kind of manifests in different stories. Sometimes it gets kind of cosmic. Sometimes it is like sort of more grounded. But I just enjoy the way that plays out in a lot of different stories, and the danger of spores and like fungi and all this stuff. It's just so fun to me. And I love the visualization of that. It evokes a lot of images in my mind. And I've always been a fan of how the stories can kind of turn into, you know, something like The Thing, or these like mysteries of like infection or like dangers that are like outside of our comprehension. And it's honestly like, it feels like at least to me, a study of nature that is like the last thing to be thought about. Like I feel like often people are thinking about like flora and fauna, more often they're thinking of like traditional plants and animals and things like that. And then like fungal sort of things are the mycology, the study of all that and the properties of mushrooms and what they can do, and how like they seem like kind of magical things that don't fit a lot of the laws of other kinds of life. So it's super cool to like add that into a story.
They're definitely weird. They remind me a little bit of like, they're like the jellyfish of the plant world.
Totally, yeah.
If you know what I mean with that.
Yeah,
or
totally.
or like an octopus or something. It's like they're like a weird version of this thing, and I think for the longest time I just kind of considered them plants, like just, you know, it's like a tree and then you have a mushroom. But they're really quite a different thing with their own set of rules and the way they work and the way they grow, and like you talked about, the way they can sort of infiltrate our biology. It's quite scary.
Well, mold, and you know, that's just in general, if you have black mold in your home, that's terrifying in and of itself.
The way that affects our brains, via whether that's, you know, psilocybin and sort of magic mushrooms and hallucinogens,
totally.
but also like the way mold can affect your personality and give people all kinds of conditions, and like all kinds of, you know, wild stuff can happen with that. So it's scary, and I think fungal horror embraces that and uses it. It's also a way to definitely explore body horror, as it sort of penetrates and gets under the skin and possibly affects your mind.
It's also very hard to kill oftentimes. Like antifungals are very different than like antibacterials and all these other things. So it, you know, if you're breathing in spores and stuff, like it's hard to get rid of, and it's scary in that way. It's like, definitely. I don't know, it makes your spine shiver a little bit.
It does, yeah. We had a flood in my condo years ago, and we had to tear everything out and replace it because we got this like touch of mold in there. But I remember like it creeped me out just thinking about it, man. It was you know, it was bothersome. So it makes my skin crawl a little bit, and I think you know, good fungal horror definitely touches on that.
So anyway, that's to say I enjoyed these elements being put together in a story that I was familiar with.
It's like people compared this a little bit to Annihilation, like Annihilation meets the fall of the House of Usher. And I can see that that idea. And yeah, I'm trying to figure out how much to describe because I don't want to spoil the book for people. But yeah, I guess if that sounds interesting to you, you should totally check it out. I do think it's scary, especially if you find body horror and that kind of stuff like unsettling and gross. It does play in that space. It's not like too gross. I wouldn't say it's not a gross out novel. It just has some gross parts, but then it's also just really unsettling. Yeah, I think it works really well in the space that it's operating in. So if you're ready, I think let's move into talking about Ursula, what I could find about her online, and then we can move into doing our spoiler section. So as we've talked about a few times already, Ursula Vernon is her actual name. She uses a pen name to write adult fiction, but her actual name is what she writes under when she writes her middle grade, I think her web comics and comics, and her young adult stuff, is my understanding. So it's really just the adult stuff where she uses this pen name. As for where it came from, she said it is both because she loves Kingfishers, and as an homage to Ursula K. Le Guin, who once joked that the initials UK could stand for Ulysses Kingfisher. So apparently it's like a little reference to Le Guin, an author we have covered before.
I've been finding myself getting really into birding recently, by the way, too. So and Kingfisher is a really sweet name. Like that's a great name for an author.
Yeah. So
but Kingfishers are very cool birds in general. Like I like their beaks are very distinct, and they're just really cool birds.
I don't feel like I know a ton about them, but maybe I do, and I just don't realize it. I'd have to look.
You would recognize them if you saw them. Yeah, they have long, distinctive beaks.
Yeah, that's my picturing them. Are they're the kind that have the long legs and they wade, or like,
no? They're kind of small birds.
They're smaller?
Yeah, they're kind of.
Okay.
They don't have very large legs. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so that's where the name came from. As far as her as a person, she is an American writer, artist, and illustrator. She has won numerous awards for her fiction across various mediums, including Hugo Awards for her graphic novel Digger, fantasy novel Nettle and Bone, and fantasy novella Thornhedge, and the Nebula Award for her short fiction story Jackalope Wives, and the Mythopoeic Awards for her adult and children's literature. Vernon's books for children include the Hamster, Princess, and Dragon Breath series, I think. And as T. Kingfisher, she's published numerous novels as well. So I was looking, and it's like something over 50 novels have been published at this point, and numerous other works. So very prolific author. She was the daughter of an artist and spent her youth attempting to rebel, according to her. But she eventually succumbed to the siren song of paint, although not before getting a degree in anthropology. She grew up in Oregon and Arizona, went to college at Macalester College in Minnesota, and stayed there for about 10 years until she finally learned to drive in deep snow and was obligated to leave the state. Having moved across the country several times, she eventually settled on New Mexico, where she works full-time as an artist and a creator of oddities. She lives with her husband, her garden, and his chickens. She first became known for her webcomics, and as her work as a freelance artist, particularly for her works containing anthropomorphic animals. She then moved into writing and illustrating for her children's books, which she first began to publish in 2008, and then for her adults under her pseudonym. She started using the pseudonym in order to avoid confusion for the parents who were only familiar with her children's books. And yeah, What Moves the Dead is the novel we're covering. That came out in 2022, was nominated for both the Hugo and Locus Awards, and it won the Locus Award and was a finalist for the Hugo Award that year.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is a really well-known book for her. As we talked about before, it launches a trilogy so far, and I think, I don't know if it's done or not, but it is a series of books. The subsequent novel is called What Feasts at Night. What Feasts at Night, as far as I could find, I don't know that it's actually a retelling or adaptation or anything for another work. I think it's just fully standalone novel. The series now ends up becoming called the Sworn Soldier series. And then the subsequent novel to What Feasts at Night is actually What Stalks the Deep, and that came out last year, 2025. So very recent. And What Stalks the Deep does borrow from another work, and it is actually borrowing some of the mythology around the Shoggoth, which is a creature from H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. So this is a thing we've
Cool.
talked about covering, but we've never actually covered. We've done other Lovecraft, but never this particular work. But so she's kind of engaging with that. So it's interesting that she does the retelling here, has a book that I think is just fully standalone, and then has this third book that now is dealing with Lovecraft and the Shoggoth. So I'm curious if there is something attached to that second book and I just couldn't find it, or if truly it was like wanting to do something that was completely on its own. I don't know.
That sounds cool, though. I like the idea of combining things that you're interested in, like almost using them as like a jumping off platform. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, and that kind of can move us into talking about the book, which we can start to spoil now. So if you are someone who's interested in this book who hasn't read it yet, click off now. For the rest of us, I one of the things I found really interesting about this book was that it is set in and around, I guess it's kind of in England, but the main character, Alex Easton, is from a fictional country that is in Europe, and it's in our world. And so I thought this was a really interesting way to kind of split the difference between fiction and speculative fiction set in our own world, and speculative fiction that's set in a secondary world where you're inventing everything, and every country is different and so forth. So you have this country, Galatia, but it's clearly somewhere in Europe. It's not really exactly sure exactly where. And it just kind of slots in. And otherwise, we got London, we have Spain, we have Scotland, we have other countries being referred to by name. And it seems like they are mostly the same, except for they exist in this world where Galatia is a place.
It's funny because I don't think this happens often, but when it does, sometimes I am being gaslit into thinking that I'm like, this is a country that I just never realized existed.
Yeah. Especially when it's in the past, you can kind of be like, was this a country that then went away and I just no longer know about it? Yeah.
Yeah, so that was an interesting process, but once the culture started being described, I was like, I think this is, especially based on the time period, I think this is sort of fictionalized, and I thought that was such a cool element, and it's one of my favorite things from the story, honestly.
It's really fun.
Because we keep hearing about the way that country is sort of different than other countries, and the way that the soldiers are all committed, and it immediately gives you this interesting character, and Alex Easton here, who's our main character, who is born female, that is a soldier that in their military, they talk about this breaks into a whole other conversation here, but they have specific pronouns. Once you sort of swear your oaths to becoming a soldier, you no longer are the terms for what we would say are he, him, she, her. It's gender neutral terminology, which is cool to get into. And then that just sort of starts to build up this idea of, again, especially in this era, I think Alex is pretty high up in the military as well. So it's this idea that this character has been fighting in war, and how that sort of manifests, and all the other characters, how they interact with a Galatian character, and how Galatians feel about Americans, and a lot of this stuff starts to come up and is quite interesting.
I'm glad you brought this up, because this is how the pronouns work as far as I understand it. Ka is use it for he or her, if you were to use that in your reference.
I think then he or she, they.
Yeah, but then if it's possessive is the other one, so that becomes then con. As I'm reading the summary, you're going to hear some of these pronouns. So that's why I wanted to set this up before I even start reading the summary, because otherwise you'll be like, what is this even talking about? Also, caveat, we are going to try as best we can to use these terms. It's tricky. These are new pronouns we just learned about from this book. I don't know if these are used anywhere else. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I know that the idea of neo-pronouns is a real thing, and people sometimes use different ones. I've heard z, zer, and stuff like that. But this isn't one in particular that I know about, and I think was invented for this story, because it's very tied into this Galatia country. And their sort of history. But it does tie directly into identity, and that, I think, becomes very key to understanding what, in my opinion, T. Kingfisher is doing with this retelling. So let's table that for now. So, retired soldier Alex Easton, formerly of the Galatian army, receives word that Khan's childhood friend Madeline Usher is dying. Ka journeys to the Usher's ancestral home in Ruavia, which also might be fictional, as far as I know, surrounded by fungus and a dark, unsettling tarn. Roderick Usher, Madeline's twin brother and Easton's subordinate, has become nervous and frail in the intervening years. Madeline is terminally ill, suffering from catalepsy. She appears cachectic, and Easton is disturbed by the thin, wispy appearance of the hair on her arms. Also present are Eugenia Potter, a mycologist, James Denton, an American doctor, and Angus, Easton's Batman. Easton tries to convince Madeline to leave the moldering mansion for her own health, but she refuses. So as we talked about, you've seen some of the neo pronouns are in there, and yeah, we were talking about like the main players here as we discuss it. But I think also one of the main players, one of the most significant characters in all of the Fall of the House of Usher, is the house itself, and I would argue in this story also the surrounding environment. Yeah. All becomes very important. And that's true in the original story as well, as we remember the story begins with Easton riding up alone and seeing this like drear countryside and sees this house that's falling in on itself, and it all is sort of evocative of the illness and something's wrong and off about this place. And Poe loved to do this where like the inner manifestations of guilt or shame or insanity or paranoia have like physical manifestations in the surroundings, and he kind of makes everything feel like of a kind. And so here, instead of necessarily the although we do have disrepair and things have fallen and are certainly fallen on hard times, but I think prominently there's also this like infestation of mushrooms and fungus that this mycologist character, who Easton meets first, actually, is studying, and that's the redoubtable Mrs. Potter, which she's referred to multiple times as the redoubtable Mrs. Potter, so I thought we should call her that.
Yeah, really cool character. I have to talk about early on, this is something that I remember most from reading The Fall of the House of Usher, is that the personification of the house is talked about very early on with this idea of like, the house, it looks like a face. The front of the house looks like a face, the windows for the eyes. And I love that in this story, Ursula Vernon was, in a tongue-in-cheek way, was like, it's a kind of a cliche to say that the windows look like eyes, but to make it kind of, to kind of extrapolate on that, it looks like, there's, if the windows are the eyes, it's kind of like spidery with like multiple eyes and placed in different places and everything.
Yeah,
so
spider's like one, cool. It's like, it's something monstrous, something other, something alien. Maybe a spider, so it kind of like settles on a spider. It's like, maybe that's what it is, but it's something weird. It has those rows of eyes. Yeah.
Closest analogy that could be like quickly given.
Yeah.
But then this idea that's carried forward of like a body and an infestation that's happening in a body, like an infiltration, you think of like diseases and things like that can get into a body. And I like that, like that's still mirrored from the original source over to here. And meeting Mrs. Potter and there's fungal life here that's nowhere else or very rarely seen anywhere else.
There's this like red cap that she like hits with a stick and it makes this awful smell.
Splits it open and it's like, like kind of like explodes out a bunch of spores and like, I guess it's like a bad smell.
Yeah, terrible.
They're dealing with.
She describes it. Yeah, she's interesting too. She's kind of mushroom looking. She has like this big hat. Yeah, I feel like, and I don't know. She's just very kind of impressive looking, and this kind of older woman who's kind of takes no nonsense and is very sure of herself and sure of her knowledge.
Also, the kind of character that when you run into early in a story, you're like unsure of. You're like not. Yeah, you're like totally. This could be a evil entity. This could be someone who is like has nefarious plans or something like that. Somebody that you're just like generally like kind of keeping at arm's length. You're like, okay,
yeah, who is this? Yeah, but I like that we begin in the same way, right? Easton on horseback approaching the house. And I'm immediately familiar. And we dropped the name pretty early on. I'm here to visit my friend Roderick Usher. And I'm like, oh shit, so it is Roderick Usher. So that's one of the things that I'm curious about retellings. I've never written one. I guess when you're doing a retelling, you should use the same names. But I don't know if there is like rules around this. Like, can you do a retelling where you rename all the characters and it's sort of a retelling only in form or shape? And obviously you are changing things, and she does throughout. But she maintains the name Usher. She maintains Madeline and Roderick. So if you're familiar with the story, the thing it does to me is it just like loudly proclaims, this is like the story you know. and yet I'm going to show you how a different path. And so it's kind of like wearing the fact that it is a retelling on its sleeve, I guess. So yeah, there maybe could be somebody who reads this who's never heard of or read The Fall of the House of Usher, and for them it would be wholly, that would all not land. But as long as you have heard of it and you know about it in some way, this is sort of acknowledging it from the jump and saying, this is what I'm doing.
Well, and like, we've seen with adaptation, because it's so similar, you think of like, I don't know, like Lion King is an adaptation of Hamlet.
Yeah.
And you change the names of the characters in that case.
Though, yeah.
But there's still like some similar beats, and you can see the connective tissue. And in that way, it's a retelling that isn't, sort of beat for beat. But in doing it this way, this is still the fall of the House of Usher. This is still the Usher house that's falling. So I like the way that like you can play in that space. And like you said, I'd be curious to know like how to know where to draw the line of like what's taking too much, what's taking not enough, and like how to sort through that. I think this landed really well for me because it allows me to see, it allows the story to go in a bunch of wildly different places while still giving that atmosphere. And having the characters named the same, it's like a different version of it. It's like seeing, I don't know, a play done by a different actor or something, like in the same role but a different actor. That's like kind of what it felt like to me.
Interesting. Yeah, so we get our version of Alex Easton, who for the longest time I don't think we realize is much different until Alex reconvenes with Roderick and then meets this Dr. Denton, who I believe is also a character in the short story, but a little bit more of just serves a brief role, is my understanding. But yeah, I whenever you meet an American character in one of these settings, I'm thinking of like, I forget the character's name, but there's an American in Dracula who's like Dracula. One of the. That's
exactly what I thought about too. Yeah,
and he's like the gun wielding, he's like from
Texan,
the West.
Yeah, Texan.
Yeah. And like I just always think of that, and it's just funny to hear all these like stereotypes. And then I'm also thinking about how Ursula Vernon is also American, so she's kind of like poking fun at herself a little bit, I think, and poking fun at Americans.
Yeah, at least at America for sure. Yeah, which I like to poke fun at Americans too because they are ridiculous.
Oh, it's so funny when Alex was like, I wish you would go back to America and then maybe keep going a little bit farther right off the other side and into the ocean or something. So it was good. I liked it. Yeah,
it is funny. It's a way to have commentary on your own country and like doing it through the lens of another country. I think is you have a unique position to be able to make commentary that can land. Living in America is a complicated thing, especially these days.
Yeah.
And, very fraught. And so I can understand being conflicted and putting something like this in a story.
So this is also, I believe, now it's a little hazy. We did this over years, but my memory serves that Madeline in the story has already been pronounced dead and is in the crypt. I think the film adaptation, she is a character that you talk to and that has lines and stuff. And I think this is like in the more the like adaptations that followed did this. But I feel like in the very original, I think she might already be in the crypt when and he finds out about this, Easton in the story.
He hears that she's sick and sees her in the hallways and that sort of stuff. And then like a day or two later hears that she dies, like, and having thought that he saw her in the hallway. Cause I do remember that, but again, maybe I'm conflicting one of the different versions. Yeah, we'll see.
My memory of it was that Madeline was already pronounced dead, or in the crypt, and this is a surprising reveal. Part of it is that Roderick in the story is haunted by thoughts that he can hear her banging on the crypt's door, and that she's actually alive down there. And we talked about how this is kind of a manifestation of guilt. It seems like this is something that Poe loved to talk about, and yeah, things are different here in this story, it seems, because Madeline is up and definitely frail, strange, kind of completely changed physical appearance, but seemingly alive. And then Roderick also looks quite aged. His hair has gone very wispy, and he is kind of a shell of his former self. So they're both basically in dire straits as we meet them.
There's also a section where they're talking about how, I think it's Easton says, like, you should leave with me. You should, let's go anywhere else. Let's get out of here. And Roderick is like, she won't leave. She just won't leave. And he's like, it doesn't seem very rational.
Also says like she can't leave, I think. So it's like she won't, plus she can't.
And knowing like where the story kind of eventually goes. And there's also like a sort of speech thing that's done throughout with Madeline when we're seeing her. Yeah. Where she's sort of like every now, especially it's definitely progressing, but early on, she just sort of has like a word here or there that she'll like kind of stumble over or say in an interesting way. She's speaking normally, then she's not speaking at all, then she's having trouble saying words, and then she develops the point where
there's also the whole situation we're about to get into where she seems to be sleepwalking. And then she has like kind of an altered state while they interact with her there. But I want to talk a little bit about Angus as well. This is a character who gets introduced early. He appears to be Scottish. He serves as the Batman, as we've talked about. If you raised your eyebrow at that, it apparently is a term for like an assistant for a soldier. Like a valet or a valet. Someone who helps out with like a commissioned officer. And this is like an old term that was primarily British, I believe. So it's not one we use a lot today, but is sort of revived here, and that's his role.
And I was quick also to say like lowercase Batman.
Lowercase.
Not a vigilante running through the halls, fighting off whatever.
Yeah, it would be quite the retelling if all of a sudden Batman was there. You thought you know the darkness, Roderick. I was born in it. Wait a minute, no, sorry, that doesn't make any sense.
That's Bane.
That would be Bane.
Either way, yeah.
Was like, where's Madeline? Where is she?
It's funny because I feel like, you could put like poison ivy in this environment and like maybe get,
that's
maybe not fungal,
quite a different kind of retelling.
Yeah.
Instead, let's move into the next paragraph. Now we have set up all of our players. Again, Denton is kind of the bumbling American, doesn't know how to navigate the pronouns, is asking slightly inappropriate questions and seems curious, but also maybe just like a little bit offensive in how he is thinking about Alex.
In speaking about that too, Easton kind of reveals to the reader, it seems, that Khan is binding breasts.
Yeah.
And that's something that's like kind of talked about, which I think is important just in terms of knowing where the character is at in terms of identity.
And it's definitely something that is, I know that it is a part of the transmasc community and identity. And I don't know all of the nuances about binding and not binding, but I know that it is something that many do. And so I think having a character like Easton do this signals to modern readers something about this character being perhaps a what we would consider a trans character today, I guess, but in this other setting.
Well, I think it told me something about the character without knowing all the nuances. It informed where the character is.
Yeah.
And then I also liked the moment of Easton thinking internally when Denton was kind of bumbling around, just saying like, so many people are so concerned with what's in my pants, like what's
and by extension who I'm sleeping with.
Some people want to know pronouns and gender and all these other things. And some people are just interested in like getting into your personal business and knowing like all the things that is private to yourself, like that don't matter, that as far as anybody else's,
Yeah. And it's important to continue to highlight this because I think identity again is sort of essential to this story. So let's move on with the plot a little bit. Easton notices that the hares near the tarn behave oddly, as if they are infected with an unknown disease. Ka sees strange lights moving in the tarn at night. Madeline begins sleepwalking, and her stilted gait reminds Easton of the hares. Easton postulates that Madeline and the hares have the same illness. Ka shoots a hare and attempts to dissect it, but the dead hare begins to crawl away. Easton, terrified, flees back to the manor. Madeline dies. Her body is placed in the crypt. Roderick claims to hear her knocking on the doors of the crypt, trying to get out. Easton visits Madeline's body and finds that her neck is broken. Eugenia deduces that the changes in Madeline's hair were due to fungal hyphae. Easton brings her to examine the body, but it has vanished in the interim. While Roderick sleeps, the others dissect a hair and find it full of fungus. The carcass continues to move on its own, seemingly controlled by the infestation. All right, so we got to talk about the hares. We got to talk about these creepy rabbits out on the countryside.
A few times that we see them, they sort of sit there and stare often. Yeah. They seem to like kind of often appear out of nowhere. They'll just like randomly multiply. There's more of them. And then also the thing that was most unsettling to me that I felt a little tingle down the spine again was the way that like a hare, which is like a large rabbit for Americans, a hare is often hopping around. These hare are like kind of crawling and
The
like
way it's described
themselves
is
along.
so good. It's
It's
like
amazing.
one forelimb goes forward, steps, and then the other one, as if dragged, gets pulled up next to it, and then one leg gets pulled up, and then the other one gets dragged. And it's like one limb at a time, kind of methodical movement to where it kind of is dragging itself. It's described as if it was like horizontally climbing a wall or something.
Yeah.
It's such a weird thing to try and picture, and it does seem very uncanny. I love that description too. It's very, very weird.
And I never expected with the cover, which I think is a really cool cover, by the way. I love the cover of the novel. I never expected that this cover would be so directly connected to the material, because I was like, oh, it's probably some sort of like abstract look at, but I think it's really cool way to like depict some of like how the fungus could be affecting these hares.
Yeah, absolutely love the cover, man. Christina Morgic. I don't know how to say her name. I think it's something like that. I met her at a I guess it was like an oddities expo here in Portland.
That's cool.
It was like last I think around Halloween. There was this like curiosities and oddities expo I went to, and she was like there with her art, selling art. And she had this painting, like as like prints that you could buy, and she'd sign them for people and stuff too. I should have bought one. I wish I had now. I didn't know we were going to be covering this. I didn't know we were going to be doing all this. But now that we are,
Cool.
I'm like kind of regret not getting one. Would have been cool to have. But
Maybe we should be at Norwescon. We'll see.
It's very, very neat. Very cool.
Yeah.
Also, another creepy thing happens in that Angus goes fishing, and he starts telling the story about the fish, and there's like a weird, slimy, like moving film, like it's described in multiple different ways that are like it's like in the fish and on the fish and on the
coming
hook.
out of the fish.
Yeah, it's real weird, and it's like something's wrong with this lake, something's wrong with this tarn, something's wrong with the fish that are coming out of it.
It makes me think something might be wrong with the Usher family.
Yeah, well, and we talked to the redoubtable Mrs. Potter again, and she drops the bomb of like, yeah, the spores are everywhere. They're probably in all of us. They live inside all of us now. And she's like talking about how like, America, I hate that. I hate America because there's like some mycologist there who claims that mushrooms can live underwater, which is not true. It's like spurious. It is funny that like we immediately kind of transition into a story about a kind of fungus that lives underwater. But yeah, that's like her whole thing about dismissing the American is around this sort of pedantic point, I think, that she's trying to make.
Yeah. There's a line about like that I just appreciated and wrote down. It's, if you don't make a fool of yourself over animals, at least in private, you aren't to be trusted.
Love that. Yeah, I always felt I kind of felt like it. I suspect that's just straight from Ursula Vernon is my suspicion. Yeah. But I liked it for this character too because it makes me like Khan Easton as a fan of pets will win me over, immediately.
Totally, yeah. But it is. I often, and I truly do believe this. Like, I think that you can see animals picking up energy from people. Like, and I'm not saying that they're bad people if an animal doesn't like somebody, but it's a little bit of a flag for me when I notice that, especially how people treat animals when they're alone.
I would say that's more of it for me. Like, if because if some people are timid around animals and have had past trauma.
Sure.
And I definitely get that. But yeah, it's like, how do people treat animals? And if they treat them as nuisances and they're rude to them, like that's the kind of stuff, immediate red flags for me. Yeah.
Sure. There's also the section when we're getting up to the dissection. There were sections that talked about like Mrs. Potter felt like she wasn't respected because she's a woman in that field.
And that was an interesting point of shared struggle, I think, between Alex and Mrs. Potter, in the whole pronoun situation and being a soldier, which was traditionally a male job or masculine job, and Ka's able to get into there and be a well decorated soldier, and we actually hear about the history of this and how this came about in the Galatian army. But connects with Potter, I think, over being in a field, an area of study that is dominated by men.
So during the dissection, there's another section here where I think it's just the doctor who's doing the dissection, and he says the animal is female, and then internally, Khan thought And if it were human, would it be diagnosed with hysterical catalepsy, which is what Madeline had been sort of diagnosed by the doctor with, which was just sort of like general hysteria of like, we can't figure out what it is, something's going on, and like it's like causing something, which is like the misdiagnosis of, and my wife kind of talks to me about this all the time and advocates for this kind of stuff of like women not being advocated for correctly, the research not being done correctly for women's health, and in a lot of ways like that, or just like it's any gender outside men, really, just the
men are considered the default, which is inherently problematic.
Yeah, so this idea that like this hare is acting strangely, and like would they just say, oh, that's just a weird thing that these hares do, there's the diagnosis, and so much of that is kind of baked into the story. Another thing that I love from the story is like again, we're seeing sort of the decline of the ushers. Madeline is like she sort of at some point changes to where she's like sleepwalking and seems to be like unable to speak as well as she was before.
Easton encounters her in the hallways after seeing her just like as like a specter almost a couple times. Finally encounters her, talks to her, and she speaks in this weird way where she's like saying numbers and like identifying things that she's seeing, but she sounds almost kind of childlike and out of it. And Easton has this thought of like, you're not supposed to wake sleepwalkers, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. And she does seem to kind of snap out of it.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things with Roderick's sort of decline as well, and seeing like what the state of the household, the state of the finances, everything like that. And for a writer to write a library, Ursula Vernon writing a library that's kind of been infected by mold and fungi. All the
books are ruined and gross,
And then also like them drying them out and burning them, I think, for firewood or something, like seemingly.
Yeah.
And that idea of like being like that like knowledge versus survival, and the way that like they're so desperate and burning it, but they have so many things going on that they like aren't engaging with this expansive library that they have. And then just visually like thinking of how a writer is so passionate about books, and to have that be like a manifestation of how how deeply this infestation has hit the family, like it's gotten into the books, and then they care little here, and they're burning them. Like who knows what unknown knowledge and everything is hidden within those pages.
So Roderick here is a little different than Roderick that I remember, in that this Roderick seems like a pretty good dude. Like there's like the moment where Easton learns about the broken neck, and it becomes clear that Roderick broke Madeline's neck. But as we're going to come to find out, there's probably good reason behind that. So this version of Roderick Usher is sort of saved because not as guilty, not as potentially villainous, didn't maybe condemn his living sister to the crypts, which seems like is possibly what happened with Roderick Usher in the original. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like it changes this character into definitely more of like on the side of the good people. I don't know if you want to call them the good people, I guess. The humans. All right, so let's finish this out so we can talk about like what's going on, because we get this final reveal here. So at this point, Denton and Easton and Potter and Angus have all kind of like teamed up, and we're trying to like figure this out in their own way, and they have to catch this hare, and they see the results of the horrific surgery they're doing, but they're all kind of working together, and they form like a little Scooby gang of sorts as they're trying to like suss out what's going on, right? Totally. So Denton admits that Roderick killed Madeline, believing her to be possessed. They enter Roderick's bedroom, where they find Madeline sitting on the bed. Oh yeah, because she went missing. That's very notable. They go down to the crypts to like see what's going on with her, and she's gone. They find Madeline sitting on the bed, her neck hanging at a shocking angle. Madeline tells them that she has been dead for at least a month. The fungus from the tarn is reanimating her body. Madeline tells them that the tarn is conscious and sentient. Doesn't use those terms, but yes, in generally, and that it is learning how to communicate with them. She asks Easton to let it infect Khan, giving it a home after her corpse breaks down. Easton and Denton flee. Roderick stays behind to burn down the house, with himself and Madeline's corpse still inside. The survivors poison the tarn with sulfur, killing the remaining fungus. Okay, so the reveal is Madeline Usher has been possessed in a way by this fungus that is itself becoming sentient, and she reveals that she's actually been sort of teaching it as almost like a thing she's nurturing. But it's unclear whether or not that's because she's already been influenced by it, but she sees it as something that she wants to nurture like a child. And you pointed out before we got on that she uses the pronoun from the Galatian.
Yeah, the entity uses those. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the pronoun again? Remind me.
Von,
and that's for it's a gender neutral term for children.
Correct. Yeah.
And Madeline, which I'm saying she and then Madeline, but it's unclear. So it's unclear how much of Madeline is still in there, because it's definitely still some. It's not fully the fungus that's talking. It's like a hybrid of the fungus and Madeline, because it seems to remember things about Alex.
Well, there's like moments of lucidity. It seems like
and
she
like
breaks
she remembers
through sometimes.
Like teaching the fungus or teaching the tarn.
Well,
as we want to
I
call
think
it that.
also that's like a horrific moment too, where Alex realizes that in just trying to communicate is inadvertently teaching Madeline, the entity, some of the language. And I think that's where Ka is kind of teaching some of the Galatian language and some of those terms and things. And that's why eventually the entity would go on to call either the spores or the tarn, like the lake, Va, which is a term for like children and this idea. So maybe this is the idea that like it's all like there's a reproduction sort of element happening here.
Yeah,
and like,
I think so. Like it's kind of like the tarn's children are Va, but also kind of the tarn itself is Va. So that's what it's weird and it's kind of unclear. But we're engaging with this idea of this like growing, shifting, morphing, invasive at times identities. At times it is sort of breathing life into an otherwise dead body. Right, we see this with the hares sometimes. We see this with Madeline. This is like what the title I think is referring to, what moves the dead. So it's got like kind of a mystical force to it. But also, Easton points out, this thing is killing you. It is slowly eating you from the inside, and it is detrimental. And so I kept thinking about this in terms of identity. If we look at this as like a Poe story in the sense that everything is about this, and we have a character who uses neopronouns and is struggling with the fact that the world often doesn't want to recognize Ka's identity. The guise of maybe Denton is an example of this, and other people that we hear about. And then you have this entity that itself doesn't conform to our ideas of gender or even like what we conceive of as like an individual or a person. It's an entity, right, that is taking over something but also killing it. And it creates all of this conflict. It creates this situation, and it's investing, right? It's going to take over everything and force itself and force its identity onto our characters. So maybe that's where it is. Like maybe we want to live in a world where you're free to explore your identity, but it has to be your own choice. And this fungus is forcing identity onto us, and that is what makes it monstrous. I'm trying to suss this out in my own head. Does that make sense? Maybe.
I mean, yeah, I get that. I was picking up on some of that as well, where like this is an idea, and this kind of story and body horror in general can lead you down the path of like something else making a decision for your body, right? And that idea of body autonomy,
and that's
like,
what's proposed by the Tarn. The Tarn's like, let me get in you, Alex.
Yeah. and like that idea of like literally puppeting, like, you know, bodies is in there, and I thought so well done. This idea of giving this fungi that's something natural, but making it supernatural. It's trying for survival. And there's this moment where it says like, we just want to like coexist or something. It seems like it's pitching it as if it's like, this is a symbiotic thing, but actually it's like, you know, it does need to feed a little bit, so at some point, like the body's going to be worn out. It'll
eat you up just a little bit. Maybe that's conformity, right? Wants you to conform to it.
And every little incremental thing that you give it, it's going to, take, and then eventually there'll be nothing left.
I like that read. So if we look at that in the context of what ends up happening here at the end and the differences. So my memory of the fall of the House of Usher is that it basically has a fissure down the middle of the damn house. And when everything goes down, Easton like flees out of there, and then like the whole house collapses on itself and like kind of falls into the lake. And it's this big like physical disaster that occurs. Here we get, an ending that ends in fire, that ends in flame. Roderick Usher sacrifices himself to take out Madeline and this fungus, burns the house down, which we learned is like one of the only things that can work on this fungus. We didn't say earlier, Potter and Angus like left, and then they come back now, and they have this sulfur stuff with them that we're going to pour into the lake, because like that's dead, but now we got to kill the lake. Because there was a part, like a creepy part, where the lake was glowing at night, and it looked like stars were being reflected, but then Kyle looks up and sees the sky is completely dark, so it's like, where is this light coming from? And it's a realization that it's like bioluminescent fungi of some kind in there.
Yeah. Which is so cool if you haven't seen it in real life. Like bioluminescence in water is like, it feels like magic.
It's very beautiful, and so it's interesting to think of it as in this like creepy context, but yeah.
But you can imagine like no context in a lake of all things.
It is also weird because you think about that water during the day and you have no idea it's in there, but then at night you can see that it's full of this algae. You know?
Yeah.
It is kind of gross in that context. But anyway, so yeah, we're burning it with fire, and we're poisoning the lake, and we're killing everything that way. A very different way to end. But I think it reflects this shift in what we're focused on, even if you would say, like, well, Roderick and Madeline still are both dead at the end, and they're brought down by the house, itself, and they're brought down by each other. Yes, but it feels very different to burn it down and to have Roderick be kind of heroic in the end and taking out Madeline, who is quite monstrous, whereas in the story it was kind of unclear, is she a zombie or is she not? They kind of treat her like she's one, but maybe she's just a sick woman who was buried alive and is like driven mad by it now and just wants to come and strangle him.
And like I said before, I like this idea of like in the original material it seems that there's something supernatural going on, and here with the idea of like mold or like fungi, there is a natural precedent that's been set where like fungi could get into like the zombie ants and those kinds of things, where like a fungi is actually like puppeting the body. And so to see something possibly supernatural, like a dying character, have these sort of fungal roots in it instead, like that's just such a fun way of being like, there's precedent in nature for this to be like kind of explained more. But then obviously you take it to the point where there's this entity that's like kind of seemingly like connecting all of it, and then that gets into obviously like quite speculative space. Like it's no longer grounded.
But you're right. It depends on like how you look at it, because in another way you could look at the fall of the House of Usher as more of a symbolic story, and like nothing supernatural actually happens in it, and it's more just like we're exploring symbolism in our fiction.
Well, it's like the internal becoming external, right? Like what the characters are going through being shown by the house.
But here you're right. It's like we've taken that symbol maybe and like given it some like literal heft by tying it to the idea of fungus and the way it can affect brains. So it's interesting, man. Yeah, it's definitely a cool take on a retelling. This is our first ever time we've done a retelling. I don't think this is something we're going to do a lot of. But if anybody knows of any that they're interested in, feel free to let us know. Maybe that we will find another one we're interested in approaching. But yeah, we just thought we'd experiment with this. And then, like I said, next week we're going to be talking to Ursula herself, and we'll be able to ask her some of these questions in front of an audience. Should be really fun. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to our channel. And again, if you're listening to this because you saw us at Norwescon, welcome. We'd love to have you stick around for a while at least and check out some of our other content.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've been doing this for about 10 years now, so we have plenty to choose from. Be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of those at Ink to Film, and we're basically on every social media platform, so just look for us.
We also have a Discord, and it's pretty active these days. We have dedicated threads for each topic. We'll have one for What Moves the Dead. So if you'd like to come and chat about that in our Discord, there'll be a link in the show notes. Just click on that, join up, and we'd love to have you over there. If you'd like to support this podcast in another way, we do have a Patreon, and man, you would be a saint if you were to leave us a little bit of money through our Patreon. It helps support the podcast, keep it going, and we release bonus episodes on there monthly. This is kind of like either adaptation adjacent or extra kind of things. This most recent one we did was actually James and I catching up and talking about where I'm at with my previous novel I wrote and where I'm at with my new novel I'm currently writing. So you can kind of track my writing journey as far as my novels are concerned. And that's an update that I just gave and should be out now. So we'd love to have you check it out, and that would be a bonus bit of content you could access. All right, man, that's going to be it for What Moves the Dead, the novella. Although not really, because we're going to revisit it next week with Ursula and kind of look at it through the eyes of the creator and see what new things we can suss out about it, see if we were completely wrong, completely off base in our takes, or if we were hopefully, at least in the ballpark of some things, I would like to think.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear like kind of all the answers and everything.
Well, and she might not want to reveal exactly what she meant, which some authors don't, and I understand and I respect, but we'll ask some questions and we'll see what we can get.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited for another creative conversation. Like, this is such a fun series that we've been doing for a few years now.
Yeah, it's cool to add on to it for sure, and we'll get to be, with each other in person, which is something that doesn't happen super often because we're on other sides of the country, but that's always fun. So yeah, we will see you next week for the creative conversation, but until next time,
keep adapting.